So Anita Dygert Gearhart, from her early childhood, her parents instilled in her a deep love of the natural world. And her experiences in humanity have led her to becoming a clinical social worker. And this ecological crisis combines those two things, her love of her humanity and what she understands about this beautiful home we call Earth, and urged her to do something in the face of the climate change problems and challenges that we're facing. So Dr. Robert Dygert Gearhart, who is Bob, is ordained as a United Methodist minister, doctor of ministries as well, ordained in the United Methodist Church in 1969 and served in the Indiana Conference for about 42 years. And he too had an awakening to this new scenario that is climate change in the global community. And he sees this as a really important defining moment in history, how we choose to respond to what is a global crisis. And that is my introduction of these two good authors of this new curriculum, Wake Up World. And I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves. Okay, thank you.
You ready? Well, I am Bob Dygert Gearhart, and I note as I look on this screen several former parishioners. I'm surprised that they're willing to come and listen to me again, but thank you. We have spent a good deal of time in Indiana, where I served in the United Methodist Churches for 44 years. Wonderful time, met many wonderful people, and enjoyed my ministry.
And I'm a retired clinical social worker, having worked with families and children, couples, and so forth, and also administratively as the CEO of a child welfare agency in Northwest Indiana before we retired, which was in 2005. And we left Indiana and we moved to the Cascade Mountains in Southern Oregon and built a house off the grid, not because we were ahead of the times in terms of the climate change, but because if we wanted to build there, there weren't any services and we had to build off the grid.
Well, maybe some of you can relate to this. This is my story. We were retired, living on the mountaintop, lived there for 15 years near Ashland, living a life of exuberance, if you please, a blissful time, as all of us were living in the golden age of America, I think, enjoying all of those things. And Anita and I were traveling in southern Arizona on a trip down to Bisbee, which is in the far east part of Arizona. And on the way, we tuned into a podcast by Terry Patton, and he introduced us to a moment of enlightenment. He was interviewing Peter Russell and Meg Wheatley and the Reverend Dowd, and each of them were telling me that the world was in crisis, that there was an existential crisis, and that we were all living in it right now. For me, it was kind of like a Saul moment. Remember when Saul was on his way to Damascus and had this bright light and suddenly was awakened? Well, we were awakened. I was awakened to an understanding of the existential crisis for the first time in my life.
So this was like 2019, late 2019. We'd sold our house up on the mountain because we decided we needed to be closer to one of our kids. But we hadn't bought a house, so we're technically homeless at that time. And in 2020, you know what happened? Actually, in 2019, COVID-19 hit, but by 2020, we were all deep into it. And we didn't have a home. So in the midst of that, we bought a home, fixed it up, moved in. Now we're up to January of 2021. And we kind of looked at each other and said, you know, this is probably the right time for us to figure out if this climate warming is really anything to be concerned about, or if it's just something that's, you know, not going to cause a great deal of distress in our world. So that's when we made the decision to spend 2021 trying to really figure this out for ourselves.
So we were living in isolation, just Anita and I, and we decided that it was time for us to be enlightened about what was really going on in the climate crisis. So after many courses and many books and inviting people, some of you, to be a part of book club where we could read books and discuss the meanings, after many podcasts, we became even more aware of the predicament that we were in as Americans and as the world. So that came into focus for us, perhaps in ways that we were unaware before.
And one of the other things we did too, honey, was that we took online courses, and I see that Flavia Franco, I think, is on tonight on this, and Flavio is one of our teachers, along with a variety of other online courses we were able to take to learn more about this. And one of the things that we learned in a book that we read, and probably we all kind of went kicking and screaming when Mike wanted to read this book, but it was a book entitled How Change Happens by Leslie Crutchfield. And one of the things that really caught our attention in that is the importance of a strong grassroots movement if there's going to be any kind of social change. And so we kind of looked at each other and said, well, what's in every community that could be a vehicle for educating people and motivating people to action? And we said, faith groups.
Churches. Churches are every place. I don't know. In Indiana, there was a church almost on every corner. So we thought, well, we could use that as a resource. So we contacted the United Methodist Publishing House and were eager to find out what the curriculum was available for local congregations, so that local congregations and grassroots people in the churches could learn about the climate crisis. And we were chagrined to discover that there was nothing. There might have been some things they suggested for youth and some for children's programs, but there was nothing for adults. And we thought, all right, maybe we could do that. Now, we remembered at this point in time that God doesn't always call those who are capable, but when he chooses you, he somehow makes you capable. So we decided, okay, maybe it's our task, maybe it's our life purpose now to develop this curriculum.
So here we are a year later, and the curriculum, Wake Up World, a curriculum on the climate crisis for faith and community groups, has become a reality. It's available free of charge on our website that Jim Little, who was also on this call, has so graciously created for us. It's just been such an important opportunity to work with Jim, and it's been such a gift from him. The website, I think Bob mentioned earlier, is wakeupworld.earth. And so you can get on and see the entire curriculum there and use the website really to facilitate the curriculum. Soon it will also be available in on-demand print form from Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and perhaps the United Methodist Publishing House as well. So with that, I think we'll stop, Rashenda, and just say, are there questions that are generated, or do you have questions? Where shall we go from here?
Sorry, I'm muted there. I want to ask a follow-up question, but folks, if you would like to ask a question, what I would love is if you would use the raise hand feature as the as a participant. Sometimes I can see hands that are raised, but sometimes I can't, and I don't want to miss you. So just to follow up, so there's a number of folks who have who have kind of bumped up a little to the climate crisis. It can be overwhelming. It can be a little frightening. The complexity, right, can be a challenge. Sometimes we see it as kind of complex. And it can be hard that, to find a way in to what the conversation kind of needs to be big, but it also has to be local, right? It has to be small and one-on-one. So I love that you called the publishing house and found that there was nothing, because who else has done that? Raise your hand. But then you took this next step and you decided, well, we're going to do it. So what was that pushed you? What inspired you? What was that thing that made you say, well, we're going to do something then. We're going to write that curriculum?
Well, let me say, by the time we had finished listening to Peter Russell and Meg Wheatley, I was deeply depressed. I was thinking, oh my gosh, we are in serious trouble. And a lot of people are unaware of it. I was unaware of it. And only recently, in the last couple of years, have I become aware of the depth of this problem. So it was easy, I guess, to assume that maybe we could do something about that. I'm not sure we can, but at least we're trying.
And I think it was sort of Rashenda too, like what felt like almost a moment of calling, I guess, on the road to Bisbee. This also, we got to this point and it was sort of like, well, somebody has to do this. Why hasn't somebody done this? It seems like such an obvious thing that the faith groups would want to be involved in this. And it's so helpful if you know something. If you're going to just talk about it, you really need to know a little bit about it. So I think that it just kind of was a calling as well.
We also became familiar with Catherine Hayhoe, who's an author and a climate scientist, right? And she said something that really struck home with us. And she said, climate change is real. We are causing it. It's serious. We must act now. And she said, acting now means talking about it.
And I say, when I tried to talk about it, because I wanted to talk about it when we were reading all these things, but I found that I didn't feel like I knew enough to talk about it. So that's, I think, a real value of the curriculum is that if you go through the curriculum, you get a basic understanding of the science, a basic understanding of the climate justice issues, and you can begin to formulate some statements and some questions and actually feel like you can have a discussion with people.
So I think the challenge to the church and to faith groups is that if the Rotarians could gather all of their strength internationally and change people's understanding and challenge people, certainly the church can do that. The people of the church can do that.
And we did that. We didn't tell them because we thought about telling them about that, but we didn't. And that is that polio was nearly eradicated really by the work of Rotary International. And they did it by the local Rotarian groups convincing people of the importance of vaccination and then helping with the distribution of vaccination. That was one of the examples in Leslie Crutchfield's research that she did on how change happens, how social change happens.
I love that story of, that example that there was this understanding that there was a challenge to be met, a big one, right? One that would have to reach into every community, and that a local group on the ground could mobilize around a message and an understanding that that challenge needed to be met. And then at every location could resource together, talk together to pull off what was a huge undertaking, which was vaccinating children for polio. And I love that example kind of comes into this conversation. You have this curriculum with an eye towards getting into these faith communities that are everywhere and have folks in there who are of good heart and good spirit and who could be mobilized for this, but also even beyond the faith community. Certainly, Oregon is among the most unchurched place in the U.S., but even in Oregon, there are places to get in. So how do you envision this curriculum being deployed, being used in the local setting, and what it could possibly do?
I think we probably have several ideas about that. Certainly, many churches right now are in the process of starting green teams. So if you are a part of a faith community, of any faith community, a green team is a group of people within that congregation or group of people who are interested in the climate issues. And so if you have a green team and you can use this curriculum to help your green team come to a place of kind of common understanding, that really enables them to figure out then how they want to move forward with actions. So through green teams is one of them. But
I think the curriculum that we've put together is so easy to facilitate. And that's one of the things that we think if you could become familiar with this curriculum, you will see how in-depth it is and how, believe it or not, hopeful it is. That if people will talk about this, if people will study this and become aware and speak with each other about their concerns and what they think they know and what they do know, we think it could be instrumental in changing things around.
And we do focus in the first class on why faith groups might have a particular interest in this because of our sense of responsibility for creation. But certainly community groups, libraries that have programs, it could just be used in any of those settings and be very effective in those settings as well, we think.
Now this is one of my things. Is I at times admit to being frustrated by the lack of motion in getting the ball rolling. So I see the curriculum as an opportunity to create that entry point, right? To get the ball rolling as we have this discussion. And I loved that in your intro materials, part of what you link to are the things that, and we're talking United Methodists here, United Methodists have already said they believe and already said matters to them, but there hasn't been any follow-up action. Beyond there's some wonderful folks taking action, but what I'm talking about, is the big enough mobilization action that we really need. Are you hoping this will light a fire under, not just to get local people in local spaces, but to get some of these more institutional levers moving towards climate? Are you hoping this might help that?
As long as it doesn't give off additional CO2. We definitely want to light a lot of flat fires, for sure. We would like to do that. And, Barb Dawson is one of the people who facilitated this. We did some pilot studies, some pilot programs. We did in Washington and in Texas and in Ohio. And Barb was one of the facilitators in Ohio. And maybe if we encourage her, she would be willing to speak to how easy or hard or whatever it was, Barbara.
Sure, no problem. Thank you. Yes, I met Bob and Anita earlier this year and heard what they were working on and volunteered to pilot at my church. It's a 6-session, and we did it through summer. We did it mid-June to late July. And I was very surprised. We had 9 people for the initial one. And at the end, we actually had 13 people. Word got around and people were excited because it was our first step at doing something. Although the church I belong to has been very energy conscious and recycling conscious, but this kind of took in the whole realm of climate change. So it introduced a few people to something very new. They didn't know anything about it. Others did. And we all sort of helped each other in understanding. I like the part of the curriculum where there's always a dictionary. They want to make sure everybody's speaking this or understanding the same terms that they're using. And each class was a little bit different. It was like a next step up. There were discussion and questions to kind of prompt those discussions after specific readings. There was readings of, what the church thinks or what the church believes. And then there was a lot of the scientific literature. There were videos like from Project Drawdown, which were very interesting. And my favorite session was actually the last one because we put together a plan and everybody brought up new ideas of what we could do. And we actually have a 5-year plan now for our church, working. We have a lot of people that are very interested in native plants. So they're going to put together a 5-year plan on dealing with invasive plants, the non-native invasive plants. We have someone taking on making sure all of our recycling plant tags are correct, and we're getting more recycling bins. And we're looking at solar energy. We're looking at writing a vegan or vegetarian cookbook. I was just very impressed with some of the ideas that came about. And the committee is meeting once a month now, and we're still going strong. So I think the curriculum will really help pull us together and move us forward.
Thank you so much, Barb. That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah. Do you want to respond to that, Bob and Anita? Does this sound like what you hope for when people work with the curriculum?
It is so exciting to hear that. And a 5-year plan, that's really fantastic, Barb. And the fact that you started with 9 people and grew to 13, that's really fantastic too. So I know you guys were doing a great job of facilitating it and keeping it interest. And Mike Wright was a person who kind of consulted with us on how to make the curriculum interesting for adult learners. So we've tried to incorporate a lot of his suggestions, and I hope, Barb, that you found it to be that. We were just so appreciative of all of your work to pilot this and then to give us feedback as you went through the classes, along with other groups that also did the same thing. That was a really important part. We also did one group here in our own home, and we had, I think maybe it was 12 different people, and a lot of them were neighbors and family and not necessarily affiliated with any particular faith group. But we found that it was a really rewarding experience for us to facilitate it and to have those people here. And I don't know if any of them want to speak to that or not. There are several of them on this call.
Anybody game to share what that was like? Go ahead, Bob, while folks consider.
I was going to say, the preacher part of me wants to say that the imperative is before us. We have no choice but to speak out and to become leaders in what I think is a huge challenge. And perhaps the biggest challenge is just getting the attention of our fellow people, our fellow man and fellow woman. How do we engage them, and what kind of conversation will it take? We think this curriculum can help people figure out how to do that, and that's our intention. It's a big intention, but it's an important part of what we hope will happen.
Grabbing attention is an important part. I noticed one of the clips that you have, at least one, there's probably more, incorporates some little clips from the movie Don't Look Up. And I don't know how other organizers felt in watching that film, but it was like sort of a dystopian view of my life playing before my eyes, of trying to communicate this imperative. And over again, you hear this message. Well, you're just not doing it the right way. If only you were more cheerful, or if you did it this way or explained it that way. And, you come to a realization there's almost no way to talk about this if people don't want to hear it. They're just going to block it out. And so I love that you're coming to this with a sense of community. We have to get community going so that we can hear each other. But also, one of the lessons for me with the movie Don't Look Up is that it sort of mirrors our cultural problem that we're not speaking the same language together anymore, that we have different things mean different things to us. We don't really necessarily understand each other's mindsets. And that's something you work on almost immediately in the curriculum. You address this by creating a whole kind of conversation around shared language and a glossary. You want to talk more about that and why you thought that was important to include?
I think as we were developing the curriculum and as we were learning about the climate crisis, we found ourselves like, oh, wow, this is a whole new language. We didn't even know these words existed. So we assumed that other people, when they begin studying the curriculum, would have a similar experience. So we've tried to take words that are important to that particular class or lesson and highlight those at the beginning. So everybody's kind of on the same page with that. I want to say any more about that?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think, Rashenda, that getting people's attention is certainly the challenge of the day. And then finding time within people's lives. Our lives just seem to keep getting faster and faster and faster and faster, and so it's like trying to squeeze one more thing in. And so maybe it's how do we help prioritize this in people's lives? And one of our reasons for doing it in faith groups is because a lot of people who belong to faith groups meet together regularly, have a place to meet. I think we're looking for people who want to be educated and then saying, here's a resource that you can use.
I've discovered that in our recent trip back to the East, that things are green there. That's a new reality for me. We haven't been able to be outside here in Spokane now for 2 days. They're advising old folks like me not to go out, not to breathe the smoke. Everything is dry. There's a promise of rain in the next couple of days. We'll see. But things back in the Midwest are so green that I think people are thinking, well, this is not really a problem. The crops are good. Everything is growing well. It's not a problem. So we are really facing a challenge on how to address this with people who don't believe it's happening.
Hey, Rashenda, is it possible for me to ask a question? I apologize because I
Absolutely.
cannot remember how to use Zoom to raise my hand.
No worries. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I apologize about that. But, both Dr. Bob and myself, we seem to be in the Methodist tradition. And so he might have heard this from the United Methodist Creation Care movement, namely that it's very important to get the faith leader involved and on board. And that probably more than any other single factor that we know of is the tool for, as we've been talking about, getting people's interest up. So Bob and Anita, I apologize for not having looked at your materials since we last spoke, but have you added anything in your materials about how to gain the trust and the interest of the faith leader?
Well, one of the things we've become conscious of is that hopefulness is really important.
Yeah.
The problem is huge, but we must talk about hope. And the hope is that we can find ways to talk about this in ways that we can act.
Sure. Well, targeting the faith leader in particular, the pastor or the priest, or whatever, different faiths can be involved, of course, too. But in the United Methodist Creation Care movement, we're talking about the role of the faith leader as being to convene and to bless. Okay. That means that the faith leader's job is to make a pronouncement from the pulpit or the public speaking place about how this is important, how this is reflected in that faith, or that denomination or whatever in certain documents, and talk about how the organization has made this a priority. And that's the convening part. And then once the creation care minister or leader brings together that group of people with the blessing of the faith leader, that then the faith leader blesses that and sets it off on its way and offers to support the project and the movement and the team as it goes along. So that's what we're talking about. I certainly don't have it mastered, but it's been helpful so far.
I think those are really good questions, Andrew. And I think when I think of a grassroots movement, I do think that we start at the grassroots level. And that really is the laity in my thinking when I think of the church. And so being aware that the laity is the grassroots, but our leaders of the church are really important in encouraging that laity work. We do have an appointment set up in a couple of weeks with one of the bishops who's been involved in this to talk about how the bishops in the United Methodist faith anyway, how the bishops might play a role in helping the individual church leaders see the importance of this particular issue in our times.
Early on in the curriculum, we remind people of the Genesis story, which is a seminal story for believers, which suggests that we have been given this earth and we've been given the responsibility for it, and we've enjoyed the fruits. My, oh my, all of us have enjoyed the fruits. Now the question is, what can we do to be better stewards of what we've enjoyed?
This actually comes up, I do have a lot of conversations with folks about this, and the why isn't the pastor doing more question comes up a lot. And as a pastor, I had to leave the parish to do this work. And so I can really, I feel that tension with, you might be able to do it a little with all the tasks you have in front of you, or but you need a supportive conference. So you need the connectional ministries people to support you if you're a pastor as well. So I think there's a lot of prongs. And if you step out to do this work as a pastor, you're kind of on your own. And so that's a kind of scary place for a pastor to end up in. So Bob, you're retired, so I think you found a sweet spot there maybe, but do you think you could have done this as a pastor in the church while you were pastoring?
Well, I probably should ask some of my parishioners to answer that question. But I think I would have broached the subject. I think I would have taken the heat, and there would have been plenty. If you get a chance to watch the film Laudato Si', you'll notice at the introduction that there are voices in the background saying, this is political, this has nothing to do with the church, he shouldn't be doing this, what's wrong with the Pope? And I thought, oh yeah, I think I've been there before. I think I've experienced that. But yeah, I would like to think that if I were an active pastor right now, that I would be ringing the bell and asking the question.
That's awesome. Speaking of ringing bells, there is a global bell ringing for the climate on November 5th, organized out of the UK, started last year when they had COP26 in Scotland, and people are being encouraged to ring out for climate. And I noticed that, is it SIL? Is that how to pronounce that, sir? I want to make sure I get that right. Oh, Sylvia, okay. Well, you're up if you'd like to answer, to ask a question, or go ahead. You're muted. Just heads up.
Well, there's a Sylvia and then there's a Sil, so I didn't know who you were referring to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant Sil because they have their hand up, but did you
Okay.
also want to share something?
I would for just a second.
Okay.
We want to thank Bob and Anita again, our neighbors, for organizing this wonderful 6-week class for neighbors and family this summer. That's how we were introduced. We didn't miss a meeting, and we went through all the emotions, and I have a whole book on it, and I've been trying to go a step further while they've been gone to some of my groups that are organizing again, September, October. So I made a challenge to a couple of my groups on a fun note, thinking that maybe they'd like to do their carbon footprint. And I really talked it up and told them my experience and everything. And I thought it would be a fun introduction into just my groups, and not necessarily, they're all different faiths. Anyway, I couldn't get one taker. I was so disappointed, so disappointed. But I'm so glad Bob and Anita are back, so maybe we can get back on track again.
Hang in there. Hang in there.
Yeah.
You're doing good work.
And the important thing is that you talked about it, Sylvia.
Yes.
You
Oh,
talked
I
about
use
it.
something every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what Catherine Hayhoe says. Dr. Hayhoe says, just talk about it. So you did.
Well,
Agreed.
and some of them are members of the United Methodist Church out by Wandermere. And I'm just wondering, are there any churches in Spokane taking this up? We got in a little late, so I didn't hear if you have any churches in Spokane that are active in this.
I don't know. I don't know that there are, but we've just gotten back from seeing a lot of you on the road. So
Yes.
I'm not sure either what's happening there.
There can probably be at some point a list on the website of places where you can contact people who are facilitating, and that actually probably be helpful. So also, you know, if you're in a United Methodist Church, I'm also happy to send you a video message that maybe your pastor could feel comfortable playing. I don't know, take a little heat for the pastor who sometimes has a hard time and not really have time for it. Okay, so I want to turn to Sil, now that I know the name difference, and it was awesome to hear from Sylvia. That was great. Sil, you want to go ahead and
Okay. Yeah, actually, I'm Richard. I'm Sylvia's husband, and I want to make a comment. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, good. It's just a comment which reflects, my current view on this topic, and perhaps a large percent of our fellow citizens in this country. And that is, when I think about the climate crisis, and then I look around me and I see these young kids so happy, enjoying their family, the grandpa, all this, and I look at the people working hard, enjoying life, creating all these things, and then I said, "Oh yeah, pretty soon we're going to have a climate crisis." I can't get my mind, my head around both of these things at the same time. They're so different, and so the challenge, as I see, and perhaps for Bob and Anita and other people who are leaders, to allow people to become more aware, of this dichotomy and various in the experiences, love, happiness, and then all this that might happen. So the question is, how can we become more aware of the impending crisis? We have to wait for a tragedy?
or maybe multiple tragedies. We had a fire through here, is pretty awakening. Bob, or Anita, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's challenging, Rich, to both hold the peace that there really is a crisis, and then also hold at the same time the peace that here is my life, my daily life, and I want to live in this moment, in the peacefulness of this moment, not in the anxiety of the future of what may happen. For me, I found hope through understanding, and that's really what we would hope that the curriculum does. Some people perhaps do better with not knowing, but for me personally, knowing was a critical piece to finding hope and finding more peace in the current moment. You want to say anything?
I think I would describe it as a dialectic, this tension that must exist between the reality of the climate crisis and my life right now, the good life.
Yeah.
And somehow or another, I hope that our curriculum will help people understand what's going on, at the same time be hopeful, as Anita said. That was one of the things that was important to both of us, and perhaps more to Anita than myself, because at times I become the complete doomer, okay? And I think, well, there ain't no hope. So, but Anita, she keeps pulling me back, and she's hopeful. And so I think if we can ground this in the biblical narrative of our relationship with the earth, that we could all take responsibility for that. in a positive way.
And I think at the same time, Rich, that I am very aware of the risks that are before us. I also feel really hopeful just from following things that are being done, discoveries that are being made, but even beyond that, just the efforts that people are putting forward all over the world. And that's very encouraging and really gives me a lot of hope.
Rashenda, what was the date on ringing the bell again? I want to contact the clergy.
It's November 5th. It's in my newsletter, and it's called Ring Out for Climate. And I don't know the time off the top of my head, but because it starts, I think you can ring it anytime you want. You could get bell ringers, or you could just ring the church bell. But the idea is contact your newspaper, tell them we're ringing the church bell at this time, and we're ringing out for climate. And we want you to know your faith community cares about climate change and communities.
Rashenda, could I go back to Sylvia Bumgardner's question about where it's being offered in Spokane? We have been told that the Episcopal Diocese of Spokane is planning to use the curriculum as their study, I think beginning in January of 2023. So that's one place anyway in Spokane that it looks like it's going to be done. And another, this kind of speaks to somebody's question earlier. One of our real efforts was to make this non-political and ecumenical. Those were our two words that we kept coming back to, because we know it can be politically divisive, and we've tried really hard throughout the curriculum to make it equally as acceptable to people, regardless of where they may come from politically.
Some hands up.
I appreciate that. I do. I think that back to that common language, if you can get together and learn a common language together, that kind of also helps short circuit the political conversation. So our time, we've got about 10 more minutes. We got a couple hands up. Sil, if I can ask you folks to mute, and then Flavia, is that correct? If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the two the Sil and the Sylvia here in Ashland. There is a group of people trying to form neighborhood groups with the idea of teaching sustainability and helping people through this transition. So there are people that are trying to form up groups, and also to speak to Sil's husband's comment, in the Paul Hawken book, Regeneration, I'll just read this quote. It was by journalist Oliver Berkman, and he said, if a cabal of evil psychologists had gathered in a secret undersea base to concoct a crisis that humanity could be hopelessly ill-equipped to address, they could not have done better than climate change. So, it's conceding that climate change is like really, really hard to get people to wrap their heads around. So you're not alone on that one, Sil's husband. And at the end of this essay in the Paul Hawken book, it talks about, when people tell you, well, if I try to do anything, it's not going to, make a difference. So why try? And he said that's, he said this is exactly the opposite of the truth. The impotence of individual actions is the reason for everyone to try. And I never thought about that, because I've been, confronted with talking with people, and they say, well, just one person isn't going to make a difference. And I never had an answer for that before. So that was my question. What?
Same rationale for not voting.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was my comment.
Yeah.
I did have a question that I put into the chat as well.
Okay. Did you want to ask that question real quick as I
if I could say something while you're looking up that question, Rachenda, there are three basic beliefs that we enumerate in every single in all of the classes that we believe that are the basis of this curriculum. The first one is that as individuals, we can make a difference, and especially if we become a part of this grassroots movement. The second one is that as individuals, we also have the opportunity to impact governments, corporations, organizations, companies through our voices, through our pocketbooks, and through our votes. And the third thing is that it's most important to talk about it. So those three things behind everything in the curriculum.
That's awesome. I love that. That's terrific. Kelly, do you want to, we're getting close, but I think we have time for another question. Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Kelly and I'm calling from Alexandria, Virginia. And I'm actually, United Methodist born and bred. And I'm actually a PhD candidate looking at creation care through the Presbyterian Church. Different conversation. But I just want to highlight in the text, I actually highlighted that there is the 11th hour calling.org. That is an ongoing chime on the 11th hour, on the 11th day of each month. It's not just November 5th, it's every month to bring awareness to creation care. I just want to make sure that was highlighted and seen in the text. So thank you for this evening.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
I would also like to mention, Rashenda, that please take a look at the website, because it does not only have the curriculum on it, but it also has a list of resources, a list of the books that we as a book club read, and a little blurb about each one, so you can kind of see if it's something you might be interested in, as well as a bunch of others. It also has a list of the podcasts that we found most meaningful. So there are quite a few resources on the website, www.wakeupworld.earth.
And I did put that in the chat earlier, and I popped it in again. So just take a look at that chat and click on that link, and then you'll have it to look at after we're finished here. We have about 5 minutes left, and there's one of the questions I like to ask folks during Climate Cafes is, especially in the context too, Bob, you mentioned that when you first started digging into this, it was just devastating, and sometimes you still need a little perk up. And I think all of us that do this work wouldn't be honest if we didn't share that that's part of the work. What gives you hope? I know you've touched on the hope already, but just to speak to that a little bit, if you would like, what gives you hope?
Well, I do have a lot of confidence in the people that I know and love, and I know that actions are going to follow. And I think that once people become aware of the gravity of this situation, that they're going to act and they're going to respond in positive ways. So that's what gives me hope right now.
And I think to have watched the progression of information that's out there and available for all of us. I mean, when we started studying this in January of 2021, we had to look hard to find anything in the newspaper. There was never anything on the news hour about it. And now, very few newscasts that we watch ever get through it without having dealt with something about the climate crisis. And we do use the word the climate crisis because it feels to us like it is a crisis, and we need to really call attention to that so that people will become informed and then will decide to take actions themselves.
I want to say I'm enjoying looking at familiar faces, people I really care about and love. And I just wish I could be there to embrace you. Yeah, right now.
And yes, Kelly Longfellow, I like ecological crisis, and we debated using ecological crisis, but decided that it wasn't a term that was as familiar as climate crisis. But I think ecological crisis is the correct term to really describe what's happening, for sure.
Yeah. Can I advertise a program that we're having? coming up on the 29th of October.
Go ahead, Judy.
Look for, keep your eyes open. There are people that are planning programs. This year, our California, Nevada United Methodists, and in particular the United Women in Faith, have been focusing on water. We had a program in March, and we're having a program on the 29th. I put it in the chat. This one is going to be just water, the tug of war between rural and urban and agribusiness versus small farmers. And we'll be talking about water in Nevada and California. But next year, it may be the whole country that we focus on. And it's the social action groups of these organizations that are focusing on things. Thank you.
Yes.
I think Judy has brought us great into our very ending, which is the take action part. So where do we get our hands on this curriculum virtually? We know that we are looking at maybe getting a published booklet at some point, maybe through a publishing house that's on the horizon. We know that if you reach out to Anita and Bob, they're going to do what they can to help encourage you. And that actually that's what we need, a little courage. We need to get a little brave and talk about this, even if our community isn't quite ready to say yes to the curriculum. Maybe watch a movie together or a documentary, or pull out a couple of the little videos that are included in the curriculum to give people kind of a teaser about why maybe this is important. There's just so much good in the curriculum that you'll find something in there to help you, I think, pull this into your community in a good way. So it is 7:00. I want to wait 30 more seconds. We'll give Anita and Bob the last word.
Anita always gets the last word.
Well, then you say the second to last one, and I'll say the last one. What I was going to say is we didn't really give Jim Little, who is the creator of the website, a chance to say anything, but we could ask Jim. Jim, is there anything that we've forgotten that you'd like to say, or?
Let's see here. Trying to get my camera on here. Well, it's really been a joy for me to become part of this. I learned about the curriculum in June, and I was very impressed with it, and I was able to get involved in terms of helping put it online. Right now, I'm actually facilitating the classes. We're doing class 3 this Sunday with the Seattle Climate Change Meetup Group, and you'd be welcome to join us if you just search for Seattle Climate Change Meetup Group. It's a very heterogeneous group, so some are church related, some are not. But you'd be welcome to join us for that, and we'll continue to do the classes every other week. But I find it very helpful to go back through the classes to remind myself about the importance of this work. I just think it's very helpful for me to kind of go back and do it. Anyway, I'm very pleased to be able to have access to the curriculum and to be able to share it with others. So.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate you so much. Okay, so if it's my last word is please consider becoming a facilitator of this curriculum and spreading the word. You can get on. Jim's got it set up on the website, so you can do an individual study just to go through it and watch the videos and see what it's all about, and then think about pulling a group together and trying facilitating it. Anything else you want to say?
Well, yeah, I can't help but say one of these little cubes is a little granddaughter of ours, and her name is Ella. Yeah. And, there is no better reason in the world to take seriously the future of our Earth than this little girl.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us are motivated by seeing the little ones and saying, hey, they need a better world than we're on track to offer them. And I believe we can make a real difference. And all we have to do is do it. That's it. There's nothing else in our way. So yeah. The other thing I was just thinking too, in terms of connecting, is if there's already a group in your church that does book studies or Bible studies, ask them if they'd be interested in exploring this study, because sometimes that's helpful too. Those things are already in place and you can just use the existing group to kind of leverage a spot. So, all right. Well, that concludes our time together. I am so grateful to all of you for being here, for taking an hour and for Anita and Bob to share what has been very much passion and a calling to create out of the Spirit and into the community in order to move us into a good place in the next coming decades. So thank you, Bob and Anita, for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rashenda, for taking time and putting this together and making it happen. We very much appreciate your help.
You're
Thanks,
awesome.
everybody. Thanks for showing up. It was fun to see you.
All right, everyone. Many blessings and have an amazing rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's always weird just to log off, but that's what we're going to do now. So I don't get to hang out with you in the hallway, but super glad that you were here.